Why an aviator wingwalked during a dogfight? The year was 1917, and the sky over France was a battlefield of roaring engines, sputtering machine guns, and the relentless pursuit of dominance. The Great War had transformed the heavens into a domain of death and glory, where pilots, known as the Knights of the Sky, dueled in deadly dogfights. Among these aviators was Captain William "Wilb" Carter, a fearless pilot of the Royal Flying Corps, whose reputation for daring maneuvers had earned him the nickname Sky Phantom. Will had always believed in calculated risks. He knew that fear was natural, but courage was the ability to act despite it. His squadron, the 34th Air Wing, was stationed near the trenches, responsible for reconnaissance and air superiority. However, the German Luftstreitkräfte had been pressing hard, and aerial battles were growing fiercer by the day. One morning, Will and his wingman, Lieutenant Edward "Eddie" Sullivan, were sent on a high-priority mission to protect a British supply convoy moving through the war-torn countryside. Intelligence suggested that a group of German Albatros fighters, led by the ruthless ace known as the Crimson Falcon, were planning an ambush. As Will and Eddie soared through the cold, misty sky in their Sopwith camels, the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden streaks over the battlefield below. Then, as expected, the enemy appeared. 5 Albatros D.V fighters, each marked with black crosses and a crimson streak that symbolized their leader. "Stay sharp, Eddie," Will called over the radio. The dogfight erupted within seconds. Bullets zipped through the sky as the aircraft weaved and spun in deadly spirals. Will expertly maneuvered his plane, firing bursts from his twin Vickers machine guns, hitting one enemy plane in the wing. The German pilots struggled to regain control but spiraled downward, crashing into the fields below. Eddie engaged another enemy fighter, chasing it in a series of tight loops. But then disaster struck. A burst of gunfire from the Crimson Falcon's plane riddled Eddie's fuel tank. His aircraft burst into flames. "I'm hit, Will," Eddie shouted. His voice crackled with desperation. Will watched in horror as Eddie's plane descended, leaving a trail of black smoke. Then, a miraculous sight. Eddie had managed to deploy his parachute just before impact. He drifted downward, but the problem was clear. He was behind enemy lines. Will clenched his jaw. If Eddie was captured, he would be executed as a spy. The Geneva Conventions meant little in this brutal war. As Will tried to formulate a plan, the Crimson Falcon locked onto him, firing a relentless barrage. Bullets tore through Will's fuselage, one grazing his shoulder. The controls were still responsive, but his guns jammed. His only defense was gone. Then he had a reckless idea, an idea that seemed impossible, yet was his only chance. He unbuckled his safety harness, leaving the cockpit. The wind howled as he gripped the fuselage, stepping onto the narrow support struts of his aircraft. He had done wing walking before in training but never in battle. The Crimson Falcon must have thought he was abandoning his plane because the German ace hesitated for a second. That was all Will needed. Balancing precariously, Will reached for the mounted Lewis gun atop the upper wing. The gun had jammed earlier, but if he could clear it, he could still fight. His fingers trembled as he worked the mechanism, the wind threatening to rip him away. Finally he unjammed it. Now came the real test, firing while standing on the wing. Will wrapped one arm around the wing strut for support and gripped the Lewis gun with his free hand. As the Crimson Falcon swooped in for the kill, Will squeezed the trigger. The bullets roared through the sky, striking the enemy plane's engine. The Albatros shuddered and spun out of control. The Crimson Falcon barely had time to eject before his plane exploded in a fiery blaze. With his enemy defeated, Will climbed back into his cockpit, gripping the controls just as his plane began to nosedive. He pulled up at the last second, breathing hard. He was alive. But there was no time to celebrate. Eddie was still down there. Will knew it was reckless, but he had made his choice. He descended rapidly, landing in an open field near Eddie's crash site. Dust and debris flew everywhere as his wheels touched the ground. Eddie, injured but conscious, limped toward the aircraft. German soldiers in the distance shouted and started running toward them. "Come on, Eddie," Will called. Eddie climbed onto the wing as Will pushed the throttle to full power. The Sopwith Camel struggled over the rough terrain before finally lifting off, just as bullets whizzed past them. They had made it. As they soared back toward safety, Eddie looked at Will, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're absolutely mad," Eddie said, laughing weakly. "Maybe," Will admitted. "But sometimes, the only way to survive is to take the risk no one else will." Will's wing-walking stunt was not just an act of desperation. It was a lesson in courage, quick thinking, and unwavering loyalty. In the face of danger, he chose to stand and fight rather than surrender to fear. The story of Will Carter became a legend among pilots. It reminded everyone that in the direst moments, bravery is not about having no fear. It's about acting despite it. And sometimes, the most reckless-looking decisions are the ones that save lives.